Today, we are talking the 2025 quarterback class here. We got them in our tiers here before the combine. So stick around for that talk and more. Hello, and welcome into the Dino Con Pod. My name is JP. I'm joined here by David. And today we're just talking quarterbacks in this class. And I know that this class is a little bit underwhelming, but I still think that it's interesting enough. It's not like the Kenny Pickett year, in my opinion, in 2022, where it was just abysmal. I think there are some intriguing guys, not only in tier one, but tier two, tier three. I think there's some interesting guys who could, you know, that could develop, and we got some upside as well. Let's just go ahead and dive into our tier one. And I think everybody knows who's going to be here for the most part, and that's going to be Cam Ward and Shador Sanders. Cam Ward's the guy that I like more. He's finishing his fifth season here. He's got pretty decent size at 6'2", 223. Not the big prototype, but he's got adequate size. And what's surprising, we discovered, is that Cam Ward, he's a few months younger than Shador, even though he's coming out with one more college year of experience. This guy was really good. He was second in passing yards in college football, most passing touchdowns, and the second highest graded PFF passer. I also really like that this guy, he's able to create in chaos. He's got really good pocket feel and instincts. He's got the escapability, maybe not the high end rushing upside, but he moves well in the pocket. He's a big play, big game hunter. So that's more the thing with Cam Ward is people want to see him be more of a timing, rein it in, not be as chaotic. Whereas Shador's kind of the other way. He doesn't have as much upside as a creator in the big plays, but he's more refined and more of a timing guy. Is there a guy that you prefer between these two right now, or is it just based on NFL draft capital?
I mean, landing spot's going to be really important when we're talking about probably two top five picks. I certainly don't see both of them making it past the Raiders at six. Where they end up is important to me, but I do have Ward slightly ahead. I think, like you talked about, the upside is just a little bit higher, in my opinion. He's got a quicker release and he's got a bigger arm. I don't think he's nearly as accurate with ball placement as Sanders, which is something you kind of alluded to, too. But the upside is just high enough to where I prefer Ward. I do kind of think the Sanders hate is a little blown out of proportion, though. I think he ends up in a good spot with a good receiver. He's going to be able to feed the guy. I think he needs a decent line. Otherwise, he might get into trouble trying to create too much. Something that kind of happened at CU occasionally, you could definitely argue. But he's very accurate at the third highest adjusted completion percentage, regular completion percentage in the 73% range, over 4,000 passing yards, 37 touchdowns to only 10 interceptions. I think he had a 1.1 turnover worthy play percentage, which I don't know exactly where that ranks between this class and last, but it's one of the lowest. So he's good at protecting the ball. I do find him very interesting, but I got to have Cam Ward a little higher right now.
Yeah, I think that there's more upside with Cam Ward's arm to be able to push the ball far hash outside the numbers. I think he's got more ability to do that. We have seen times where these guys that are kind of these wild horses, like Jordan Love, Patrick Mahomes was like this, where they were the guy that's searching for the big play and they were able to rein it in. But on the other end, you got guys like Will Levis, who they're the big play guys and they can't rein it in. I just think Shador, he's a little bit capped out. There's not really much that he's got really got to fix. It's going to be more so just mental diagnosing coverages, which you can win it that way. We see when you look at the top 4 or 5 best quarterbacks in the league, we got one up there in Joe Burrow that does win in that fashion. I do think Burrow, he's a little bit thicker. I think he's a little bit twitchier as an athlete. I mean, Burrow, he was an all-state basketball player as well, and you kind of see that. But that's the kind of way I think you could see Shador win in the more of like the Tua, the Jared Goff range, something like that. I think his upside's closer to that range, and that is why I prefer Cam Ward because I think he could be a tick higher than that. Still, guys that are interesting though. These guys, like we said, top 5 picks, maybe six at the very least. But I think they're more so going to be system fits, more so for Shador. I think you give him a good system. I think Dable would know how to use them. And, if you give him Malik Neighbors, maybe they add a receiver via free agency just to have a decent receiver opposite of Neighbors. I think it could be fine. You don't need to have rushing upside to be great. Superflex, we just, these QB2s, they're still pretty darn valuable as well.
Yeah, and I think just going to mention this here. I've heard a lot of people talk about Cleveland as a bad landing spot, And like I get you don't like having a coach who might get fired next year, but I believe in Kevin Stefanski. I think he's a really good coach and a really good offensive mind.
Coach of the year a couple years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen what Joe Flacco and Jameis Winston have done when they stepped into this offense. So competent quarterback play and Kevin Stefanski go well together. So I kind of think that's not a bad spot for either of these guys to land. So give me a young guy there that can develop a little bit. I do think obviously pairing Malik Neighbors with a good quarterback would be great, not only because we would like to see that offense, but I think he might be my most rostered wide receiver now. So I would be thrilled if Malik Neighbors could get one of these quarterbacks. But look, you guys know who these top two are. We don't need to spend too much more time on them. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add about these two.
Yeah, not much. These guys, they're just a little bit older. They're gonna be 23 this year. But no, I still think that these guys are first round worthy, and don't be too scared off of these guys. I mean, quarterbacks are still very valuable in Superflex, and I think they're probably what 104 and 105 where I have them right now.
Yeah, I think anywhere in the 102 to like 106 or 7 range, they should both be off the board depending on how it falls. I think 103, probably one of them will end up there. It's just hard to decide who. But moving on to tier two, we've got a couple of guys with some outside chance at first round draft capital, both NFL and Superflex rookie drafts. We've got Jackson Dart and Jalen Milrow. Now, Jackson Dart is someone we as a podcast have been pretty high on. We picked him as a sleeper coming into last year. He's 6'2", 225. This is his fourth season at Ole Miss. Well, 3 seasons at Ole Miss, one at USC. So he's not an early declare, but I think more and more with quarterbacks, we're seeing that that's not quite as important. We want to make sure they get the reps in. I think with Dart, he shows the big arm. He's got a lot of touchdowns. He's, I believe, the highest graded passer in PFF this year from quarterbacks in this class. And he's not an elite rusher, but he has more rushing upside than either of our tier one quarterbacks, in my opinion. Not nearly the upside as a rusher as the other guy in this tier, though.
Yeah, I mean, Dart. When you just look at the PFF passing grade of 91.7, right up there, the tippy top of the class. It's impressive when you combine that with the tools, above average athleticism and above average arm. He's got good size as well. It's just the mental part, I think, is the number one biggest issue here that you hear in the NFL draft community. And I heard there's a lot of half field reads. It's not a really a pro style system. I just don't think what he saw in college is going to be anything like what he sees in the NFL. But there's definitely some upside. There's definitely some upside. This is the upside tier, honestly. We have to see the draft capital on Jackson Dart. I don't care if he goes round one. I still want to see him sit because I just don't think he's there mentally, not nearly to the degree that the tier one guys are. But he has this tier obviously has as much probably more upside than tier one. It's just there's a lot more risk with these prospects. They're more day two guys in my opinion. But Jalen Milrow, this is the Konami code guy. Is he a good enough passer? Let's see what the NFL thinks. Is he going to be a top 40 pick? Maybe the Raiders take him in the top end of the second round. That might be kind of interesting there with Chip Kelly and Brock Bowers. I kind of like that for him. But he could slip even further past that. Regardless, I think there's definitely some concerns as a passer. Didn't really take a big step forward. He at least cut back the sacks from this 2023 season to this season. That was a big issue because this his pressure to sack rate was one of the highest I've seen. But it's at least at an acceptable range now. And man, real analytics said they project him to be low four threes with the miles per hour and all the data that they have that said 4.37 or 4.39. And you see that when he played against Georgia, it was one of the best games of his season. He looked like the best athlete out there, and that's just absurd. He's got a big arm, he's got adequate size, and just the rushing touchdown capability. I mean, he's double-digit touchdowns. I believe it was 20 touchdowns this season as a rusher. That is absurd. Let me look at that because I don't.
I think he might be right. He had an absurd amount of rushing fantasy points per game. I think it was like 15 rushing fantasy points per game on top of the passing work. Like you said, the upside is undeniable for fantasy purposes. If he gets to a spot where they're willing to be patient with him and build around his skill set, he could be an elite steal, I guess, honestly.
Yeah, I will say we've got not moving on yet, but we got six other quarterbacks we're talking about, and he graded out at least better than two of those guys. So it wasn't abysmal, but definitely not in a range that gives you a whole lot of confidence. And by the way, it was 20 rushing touchdowns that he had this year. And if he's playing, if he's got a starter job, if he's on the NFL field, In a Superflex league, I think unless my quarterback room is really, really strong, I'm going to be starting him in a lot of cases. It's just, will he be a starter? Will he be a starter is the big question here. He's not projected to be a round one quarterback. I guess it's possible. Could see a rise out of the combine. We already know he's fast, so I don't think he really should rise. If he runs a 4.37, let's not just prop him up because we already know this about his profile. That's why we have him here in the first place. But yeah, I will probably take some shots on, have some exposure because if he does develop and he's on the field, yeah, he's going to be valuable for fantasy.
That upside is just there, and whenever he starts, he's going to have a market. So, like you were saying, he's probably going to be a starter on your fantasy team if he's starting in the NFL. But if you are stacked enough at quarterback that you're not starting him, you should have a pretty decent sell window if he actually gets a few starts at least. So definitely someone like you said, we want some exposure to, just not over exposure where we're going to be burning all that draft capital if nothing happens.
Yeah, I think all four of these guys, they're definitely startable if they're starting. But moving on to our third tier here, we've got two guys for a third time in a row, and we've got Will Howard and Quinn Ewers here. And Quinn Ewers, he's kind of the guy that everybody was very, very hopeful for. Like, oh, first round pick in the 2025 NFL draft. The season did not go how he wanted. Was he terrible? His stats aren't terrible. If you look at his PFF passing grade, it's the worst out of all the quarterbacks we've talked about so far. It's worse than the guys in tier four actually as well. It's just that he's still in that conversation of, he could be a third round pick that NFL teams might be kind of interested in. He's got the big name, one of the highest graded prospects ever coming out of high school. He reclassified, so he came into college a year early. He's still only 22 years old. So there is upside, but I'm definitely going to be below market on this guy because that's a terrible, terrible PFF passing grade. I don't think he's ever really taken over games, the way that I wanted to see. Like, I just think he's fine. And if you're fine in college with an offensive line that's really good in Texas, a good receiving core, and you're still just fine, yeah, I'm probably not going to be that interested. Maybe I'll have one share, but I don't know. I might have none.
Yeah, I mean, he has less than half as many career touchdown passes as Shador Sanders, but only three less interceptions. Shador Sanders was like 122 to 22. He's 55 to 19. Never had a season over 3,000 passing yards. Never had a season over 2,700 passing yards.
Which injury
So
plays a factor, but
it
yeah, still.
absolutely
But
does.
that's
It
a
absolutely does. He is still young, just about turned 22. Like he said, he is pretty big. He's like 6'2", 210. Maybe you could do with a little extra muscle on his frame. The arm talent is there because I mean, you don't get a perfect grade out of high school as a recruit unless you're pretty good. That is a very rare thing, very hard to achieve. He just never quite lived up to that. So I think most of the reason we have him in this tier is the fact that he has had that hype, and we do think there's a chance he's a day two pick. And if he is a day two pick, that means he might have a chance to start. And if he's a starting quarterback in Superflex, you want him on your roster if you can. But yeah, definitely not an exciting prospect, not someone that we're high on, and quite frankly might end up a tier or two lower. Or I guess the space between tier two and tier three is kind of big, kind of bigger than the graphic would indicate. But we do like Will Howard a little bit. At least I do personally. I really like him. I got quite a fond spot for this guy, leading my Ohio State Buckeyes to a national championship. But he's risen in this prospect, I think, for good reason too. He's 6'4", 235. And I know he didn't run a ton this year, but he is fairly athletic, kind of like in that Jackson Dart range where you're not going to build your offense a bit around his rushing ability, but you can have some design quarterback run in there. You can have some short yardage things. Maybe he'll get some touchdowns. To me, as an Ohio State fan, things that I saw that I really liked, he stepped up when the pressure was highest, even after making huge mistakes. Like he threw a pick six early in the Penn State game to put Ohio State down by two scores. Looked phenomenal after that. He's made mistakes in games, sure, but he typically rebounds from them very well. And like I said, in the clutch moments, I was very confident that he was going to do the right thing. So I think those are important, especially when you combine him with the size he has, the leadership ability that he has, the rushing ability he has. I don't know that he'll ever contend for a tier one spot as a quarterback, or even sniff that. But I think he's got a chance to be a decent starter for a while. I think he's more likely a backup, but I'm starting to hear some NFL hype that makes me think maybe he'll get drafted in a situation where he could start for a while.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about winning the national championship, especially in a 12-team playoff format like this where you have to win time and time and time again. He's got the best size of anybody in our top three tiers. I mean, a lot of guys are right around 6'2", where they've got adequate size, but he's 6'4", like you said, almost 240 pounds. He had 9 rushing touchdowns in 2023, 7 this year. So yeah, he's got some ability there. Like he's at least giving you something as a rusher. And man, 35 passing touchdowns, that's pretty good. I mean, I know he had a couple extra games, but I have him much higher than Quinn Ewers, just the way that I envision them right now. We'll have to see what the draft capital looks like. But yeah, the passing grade on PFF was 84.2. That's pretty solid. I think when he was throwing the ball deep, whenever I saw him throw to Jeremiah Smith, it looked like a catchable ball. I swear in the playoffs, like every ball that was deep, at least gave his guy a chance or it was a perfect ball. So I think that if you got some rushing capability, you can push the ball down the field. You got size. Yeah, there's definitely some upside that maybe we have a starter here. Dak Prescott was a third round pick. I think he could go in that range. Dak's the best end outcome. I don't think we're going to see that, but there's at least some percentage chance that he becomes a valuable dynasty asset.
Something else I like about Howard that I think is becoming it used to be really big back in the day, and then we kind of went to the early declares being preferred, but these days we're thinking maybe the more experience you get in college, the better. He's got over 1,100 dropbacks. He started almost, I mean, he didn't start much his sophomore year, but freshman year played a lot, junior year played a lot, senior year he played a ton, and then last year played a ton with us as well at Ohio State. So he's got a ton of experience. He's got good size. Like I said, his leadership ability is raved about. So I would love to see him end up in a good spot. And if he can't start, I think he's going to be a pretty darn good career backup. Which I know that doesn't matter for Superflex, but look, this isn't the best quarterback class. We're not going to have six guys that we really like. So taking a mid round flyer on these guys, give me some Will Howard.
Yeah, I mean, even if you take Will Howard in the mid to late third round in a rookie draft, if he is a career backup, I mean, if the starter ahead of him gets hurt, you're probably able to still get like a third for him. So I don't think it's a bad pick to make somewhere in that range. Like maybe he falls to the top of the fourth, and at that price point, I would love to scoop him up. We'll have to see for sure. But yeah, I think both of these guys are probably round three ish in rookie drafts right now is where I would have them. Tier two, I think they're both around round two. I think that the range is pretty wide there, 201 to 211 maybe even.
Yeah, I think those tier two quarterbacks I would have right now, probably early to mid second, just because the upside. I think if these guys, if I knew in tier three, if I knew they were day three capital, probably much more likely as a third round draft pick. Viewers maybe not even. We'll have to see where he goes. But Howard definitely, I think, solidly in the third.
Yeah, I think if all things are equal, draft capital wise, approximately, we're going to be more in on Will Howard than Quinn Ewers. But moving on to our fourth tier here, we've got a bigger tier here finally. We've got Dylan Gabriel, Curtis Rourke, Riley Leonard, and Kyle McCord. We got two older guys, and we got two guys that are a little bit younger here. And the two older guys here are Dylan Gabriel and Curtis Rourke. These guys are very different size wise. Dylan Gabriel, kind of the biggest knock against him is not only his size at just 6 foot. I've heard rumors that he might be even shorter than that, 5'10", 5'11". But he's also a 6 year guy who's 24 years old. A lot of college experience. Maybe it's not awful, but when you don't have the size, I'm not that interested in him. I think he could be good as a backup for a guy like Tua. I think that offense that you run is very, very similar. I think if he's on the board round four, I think the Dolphins would love to have him as a backup because you don't have to change the whole scheme. That like we've had to see when they had Snoop Huntley in there. I think that's a perfect kind of a fit. But I mean, you see a lefty, smaller guy, not quite to the same degree as Dylan Gabriel for Tua, but yeah, I think he might be a fine backup. It's just really the way I see him.
I think that's perfect because that's kind of what I saw too. Is I don't think this guy's a starter, but boy, would the Dolphins love to have him. Not only is he left-handed, which does change some things for your offense, but he plays in a similar way. It's very anticipation based, very good processor, accurate thrower. Just doesn't have the cannon. So I think that if the Dolphins were to draft him, he'd be a very good backup to Tua. And with Tua's health issues, he could definitely see some playing time, which would make him draftable in superflex leagues, certainly more deeper leagues. But yeah, I'm not sold on him as a starter. really any of these guys in this tier. Obviously, if we're barely sold on tier 3 guys being able to start in the NFL, these guys are much more fringe. But, we'll go to the next one. I'll talk about your Curtis Rourke, played at Indiana. He's also a little bit older, 24 years old. Did have a 90.2 passer grade, which we like to see. He is also pretty big. He's 6'5", 220. Doesn't really have much rushing upside. Decently productive at Indiana, had a pretty darn good season last year, almost 30 touchdowns and 29 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, over 3,000 passing yards. I think he'll probably also serve more as a career backup.
Yeah, I don't think there's much that separates the two for me. Curtis Rourke's got more size, but Dylan Gabriel, he's got more production over the length of his career. I mean, Gabriel's producing as a freshman and sophomore over 3,000 passing yards. And Rourke, it took him until 2021. He only had 1,800 yards. He's gotten better, so I still just don't see any starter upside overall. Had a good year, but I just think that's all he is just a good college quarterback that's more of a backup.
Yeah, I think that's true probably for everyone in this tier. Let you talk about the next guy here on the list because I know you've been pretty high on Riley Leonard.
Yeah, and it's mostly due to the fact that I mean, when you look at Riley Leonard, he's got good size. He's 6'4", 205. I'm seeing listed here. We'll just see what he measures at. The passing, that's kind of the concern. He's talked about in a similar vein as Jalen Milrow, but not quite as proven. Um, this year at Notre Dame, they had a really good year. He had 21 passing touchdowns, 8 interceptions, so it's okay, not great. He's not really a great passer, unfortunately. I think he's got a pretty strong arm, but he just doesn't. I don't think he reads defense as well. I think because he is 22 years old, that there's a chance that if he sits, like maybe there's some starter upside, but honestly, it's really, really hard to see. But he does have rushing upside at least. That's why I like him. He had 13 rushing touchdowns as a sophomore, um, right at 700 rushing yards. So that's interesting there at Duke. This year at Notre Dame, he had 17 rushing touchdowns, 906 yards. So if he is starting, maybe you can start him because of the rushing upside. I don't have as much faith as I do in Jalen Milrow, and I think the NFL sees these players much differently as well. So I think it is a real, real long shot. But maybe if he is a backup, you can plot, put in your lineup potentially if you really need to. If the starter ahead of him gets hurt.
Yeah, I think the rushing upside is a great point for fantasy, especially. I do think career backup maybe behind a like a Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts or someone where your offense is already built around the quarterback run to a certain degree. Obviously, those two teams slightly different degrees, but I think that would be a good spot for him long term. I don't know if that matters for fantasy, but with his rushing upside, like you said, if he ends up getting a spot start or two, you either get to plug him in with some rushing upside for your team, or you get a chance to sell him. So as far as guys in this tier, I think there's a pretty strong case for him being the most valuable personally, and that's just because of that rushing upside.
Yeah, with the size, age, and rushing upside, I think that puts him right at the top of this tier. But the other guy who's a little younger here is Kyle McCord. He's 22 years old as well. He had an 86 PFF passing grade, and that's pretty good. It's right up there with Dylan Gabriel almost, and that's at 2 years younger at Syracuse. He had a really, really big year after Ohio State kind of kicked him out of town, which I think was kind of justified because I think he was good at Ohio State, but he wasn't great because they have high, high expectations there. Obviously, they just won a national championship this year. That's the kind of roster that they have, and if you're not able to get them there, I don't blame them for kicking him out. And it's not like he offers much as a rusher, so there's not much upside there. His size, it's decent size too. It's 6'3", 215-ish pounds. I mean, this year he had almost 5,000 passing yards.
Yeah, and I will say we gave him the opportunity to come back. He just was going to have to compete, and he didn't want to do that. Not that he's not a competitor. I'm not trying to take anything away from him. He just felt that he had earned a starter role no matter where he was, which is fair. Look, he had a great year at the SEC. I think he's or ACC. I think he broke some ACC records. Over 4,000 passing yards, 29 touchdowns. Looks really good. Looked like he grew something from the outside looking in. I think it seemed like he was playing with a lot more confidence this year than he was at Ohio State last year. I don't know if that's because the people around him saw him as a leader more at Syracuse than at Ohio State. I don't know if he grew up more between those 2 years or if the process of transferring helped mature him. But I thought he played with a lot more confidence last year, and I think that really, impacted how he played. But it's not like he had a bad year at Ohio State either. On what, 230 roughly less dropbacks. He threw 24 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, so not nearly as many yards, but a lot less dropbacks, almost as many touchdowns, half as many interceptions. He was a five-star recruit according to some books. He's what, 6'3", 220. If I were to bet on one of these, if you were to tell me one of these four ended up being a starter for 2 years or something, I would bet on Kyle McCord over the other guys, I think.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said that year with Ohio State, that was his very first year starting. So I mean, for him to take a step forward as his second season as a starter, that makes a lot of sense to me. So I think I don't know if it's 5% chance that he's a starter in the NFL, like maybe like you said for a couple of years, 5 to 10%. I think he's probably got the highest chance that I would give out of all these guys. But like we said with Riley Leonard, he's just got more upside if he is, getting some spot starts here and there.
Yeah, and I mean with these four, unless we see either a great landing spot or good draft capital that's kind of unexpected, these guys are all spot starters at best. So I think we're talking maybe late third, if that even. A lot of these guys might go undrafted in your rookie drafts. So some flyers to take, but like we said at the top, this isn't the best quarterback class. It is not quite the Kenny Pickett year. There's definitely some talent here, but it's nothing like last year when what we had 6 first rounders and we're in tier 3 by our 6th quarterback this year. So
Yeah, I mean, not only six first rounders, six in the top 12. It was historic, that's for sure. So definitely can't expect that maybe ever again. That's unreal. But yeah, I think these guys, like, if I had to put a price tag, it'd probably be around fourth round pick just at this point, maybe even undrafted. We'll have to see because they could be sixth, seventh round draft picks, a couple of them, and at that point, we're even less interested. But I think that about does it for us. Thank you all for joining us with another episode of the Dino Construction Podcast. If you liked the video, please give us a like, drop a comment, and maybe even give us a subscribe. That'd be great. We're getting close to 500 subscribes. 500 subscribers, it would be great. That's something we've really been trying to get to, but I appreciate it, and we will see you next time.